It wasn't too long ago that I would have said that Daredevil was my favorite character in comics. This is because of his deep struggles with religion, which is something that I faced throughout my life. He would struggle with his actions being at odds with God, hence devil in the name. This is really the only superhero I felt I could relate to on a personal level. That is, until I discovered Moon Knight. The whole reason I started getting into his comics is the show, something that I grew ever more excited about. You can imagine my surprise when I discovered that the character is Jewish himself. Now I had a character that I could really relate to. This personal connection to the character really grew for me in the 2021 run, The Midnight Mission by Jed MacKay. In this run, the character himself has gone through a lot of development, largely gaining some sort of control over his DID, another defining characteristic of the character. This development opened up the opportunity to discuss the character's Jewish heritage. The reason I say heritage instead of faith is because the character more or less is the priest to the Egyptian god of the moon, Khonshu. He turned his back on his heritage and his father, who was a rabbi. This allows for a very interesting scene where Moon Knight, or Mark Spector, is in therapy. The scene starts with the therapist asking why Mark is unhappy. After some back and forth, he asks if the therapist is Jewish. He says, of course, there's being raised Jewish, and then there's being raised by a rabbi. He then goes on to speak of his disdain for his father, a father who's more or less a foil for his current state. Mark is the servant of an Egyptian god, while his father is a follower of the Jewish faith. His father hated violence, which, in Mark's eyes, is something that made him weak. A weak man serving an indifferent god. This is a sentiment that I grew to have in my own life. An indifferent god. Growing up, I started to notice that my people were hated throughout time. Our stories were that of destruction and pain and death. We were slaves in Egypt, persecuted by Romans and slaughtered by Nazis. How could our God, my God, let that happen? Mark goes on to say, and from then up until now, we took our licks from practically everyone. My father told me that it was our perseverance that was our greatest quality as a people. This rhetoric is something I remember my history teacher all the way back in 7th grade saying about the Jewish people. We were able to, no matter how bleak and somber the world gets, keep going. We never gave up our hope. And that made me think, once again, what other choice would there be? We were slaves in Egypt, so we fled. We were persecuted by Romans, so we rebuilt, and we were slaughtered by Nazis, so we survived. Even after history trying to kill our faith since its infancy, something about it seems to remain. Regardless, I don't know how I feel about the indifferent God. This is not to say that my faith has been shattered, as I feel deeply tied to my own heritage and the beliefs within. But my sentiment about it follows closely to that of Mark Spector. I cannot blame the character for turning his back on his faith to worship another. Abandonment will do that, especially when that faith tells you to be unwavering.